Welcome everyone to this month's expert session here in the Persistence Hub. Today I'm very happy to welcome Simon Martinelli to the Persistence Hub here with his talk about AI unified process. And we will dive into what that means and what kind of process you actually need when developing software with AI tools and code generators and so on in a minute. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about Simon in case you don't know him. He's a Java champion, a Vaadin champion, an Oracle Ace Pro. You probably saw him somewhere on social media, maybe on Blue Sky or LinkedIn. You can see his tags here on the slide. Or at some conference, somewhere in the US or in Central Europe. He's a very prolific speaker. And, well, if he's not speaking at conferences, he's working as a self-employed programming architect. So he has lots of practical experience with all the things we will be talking about here today. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, welcome.
So, topic for today is AI unified process. So, maybe give us a quick introduction to what that actually means.
So, I started with AI-driven development last December because I was asked by a friend who is in the same sports club as I am if there is a tool to manage volunteers. So we have festivals or other parties, for example, where we need volunteers. And they're currently using something, but that's a bit outdated and has a lot of bugs. And he said, hey, you can generate something with AI because I heard that we can do that now. And you're a software engineer, just do it. And then I said, maybe let's have a look at the tools. And so I started in December with Windsurf as an agentic AI tool, probably one of the first tools that were around. And later on, I started looking into Claude Code and JetBrains Juni. And there I was with my application, and I thought, hey, how can this work? Or where do I put the prompt, or what should I prompt to get the best results? And suddenly I saw a blog post from Simon Maple. He's working currently at a company called Tessel, and they are creating a tool for spec-driven development. So I was looking in this term spec-driven development and realized, oh, that's a very good idea. So before prompting, we should think about the requirements. We should think about how we can do a specification that AI understands what it should do.
That doesn't sound that different to classical software development.
Exactly, because this sent me back like 30 years ago when we had rational unified process. Maybe you know about that still. A lot of people didn't like it, but they probably didn't like it because it was not customized, because the idea was that the rational unified process is a framework and you can choose the process, the roles, the artifacts that you want for your project and just use that and not all of that. So that's probably one of the problems that they had with that. But the interesting thing about that is that you indeed have artifacts, and we have requirements and specifications. Back in the days, we were using use cases and not stories, for example. No user stories, we had use cases. We also had software architecture documentation, and we had an iterative incremental process. So it kind of an agile process. We did all the phases in multiple iterations to work on the software, and every discipline in the software process, like business analysis or requirements engineering, development, testing, deployment, stuff like that, were all run in parallel. So I really like the process. And so I was looking at that because I was using user stories. But I'm not a fan of user stories because user stories, probably as they were meant, were great. But what usually people often do, it's just a sentence. And in fact, the business requirements and the rules are then hidden in acceptance tests or acceptance criteria. And so I was looking back and said, oh, I like use cases. And maybe that could be a better approach because use cases have a main flow, they have alternative flows, they have business rules, they have precondition and postcondition and stuff like that. And maybe I can use that to generate code from such specifications. So that was more or less the idea that I had. And that's why I created the AI unified process. So I was looking into the original rational unified process, what artifacts do we have, and what processes are there. And so I figured out somehow which of these artifacts can be generated or can be used for the next step to generate, like the code, for example, or tests.
Okay. So based on this process, what do you actually have to provide? So how does it work?
Yeah, maybe I can share my screen.
Yeah, can see your screen now.
And that's a website. So I created a website. It's AAP Dev. And there's also a story. So that's a blog post about how it works. And then I have tried to focus on the challenge, because something that I didn't mention is I'm working very often on software modernization projects. And the biggest challenge that we have in 2025, when we want to rebuild a system, we don't have any specifications.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have to kind of refactor the specification out of the code. And a lot of people tell me, hey, the truth is in the code, but that's a problem, right? Because it's just the code. It doesn't show any concepts or IDs. It just shows the implementation. And maybe the implementation is not correct. And on the other hand, the implementation is usually bloated because it was maintained over a few years, and then there were several developers working on that. Every developer had a different style. Sometimes they didn't really want to touch the software, so they added kind of balconies around the software and some if statements and stuff like that. So if you do a reverse engineering of that, for example, you can use AI to generate an activity diagram from a method or from a bunch of code. And this is usually useless because this is not exactly what you want. And so that's also a motivation for the spec-driven approach that I really like, because I think once I will be retired in a few years, probably other people will have to modernize the software that I'm currently creating. So I like to have maybe a better legacy for them than what we have currently. So,
Yeah, to connect here, all the problems that you described are not only issues with modernizing software, where some developers might think, yeah, we will see when and who will do that, right? It's something that every one of us benefits from, because every now and then our software doesn't behave like it should. I mean, there are bugs, there are performance issues, and all kinds of things. And I see that in most of my consulting projects, where we take a look at the software and recognize, okay, this part of the code does dozens of things. What is this actually supposed to do? So what is actually required here and what not? And having a spec there would be really, really helpful. So spec and tests would be great.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's another problem, because the business people cannot decide on code.
Yeah.
So if they need to change their business process or change the software that is supporting the business process, if they have to look at the code, they're lost.
Yeah.
And probably also the developer that initially created the application is no longer in the company. So it's probably no one who really knows what this software should do. So that's really, really a problem.
Yeah.
So let's go down to maybe the phases. So I kept them from rational unified process, because the unified process knows inception, elaboration, construction, transition phases. This looks like waterfall, but in fact it isn't. So it's kind of phases in product or project development, depending on what you're doing. So usually it starts with a vision. So you need some idea what you want to build, and finally it will go to production. But you can iterate on all these phases again. And the process finally here has a few artifacts. So these are the smallest signs here, and then we have processes. And there's a little icon. So if it's kind of a person, then it's a manual task. And if it has this other symbol, then it's probably AI generated. And the idea is that you usually do that anyway. You have a vision. So what you want to do, for example, in my case, I want to manage volunteers, manage like shifts that people can register and then work at, for example, a music festival. And based on this vision, we also usually do kind of a testing strategy or a test concept. So it depends really on what kind of application you are doing. So do we need like load testing? Do we need other tests, end-to-end tests? How do we distribute unit testing, integration testing, and all the other testing style? We also need to look at how we can manage test data and stuff like that. That's not usually not the task of a developer. That's usually the task of a test manager or a test engineer, right? But we have as an artifact from developing the vision will be the vision. So the vision could be kind of an initial document where we describe that. And already this vision you can take and use AI to reason about it. So AI can help you to refine your ideas, can help you to get a better understanding about your problem, because maybe your problem is not new. So in my case, volunteering management and shift management is not new. So a lot of people have done that. So probably AI knows very well about what kind of processes you will have, what your model or entity model could look like finally. So that's something that is maybe already there. And then you usually have the process of gathering requirements. So that's very often the task of a requirements engineer or a business analyst. It depends on your setup in your application. Often it's the team, maybe it's also a developer, an architect, whoever could do that. And what you then get as an output is kind of a requirements list or a requirements catalog. There, for example, user stories are a great fit because you have more or less kind of a ID what the user wants to do with the software, and you can use the acceptance criteria to define acceptance tests. So based on this requirements catalog, we can do a lot of things. So we can generate, for example, a system use case and entity model. So just a diagram, not really a detail, but I mean, going to the requirements catalog and look at the terms that you have there will identify, for example, actors in the system, entities in the system, business rules in the system, stuff like that. So that's something that AI can help to extract and to build models out of it. By the way, I use Markdown for everything because that's text-based. Everything that you see here on the screen, every artifact is also in version control. So I'm currently using this process at the customer. And also the requirements engineers and product owners are using Git. So they use even IntelliJ to edit the Markdown files, for example. And what we also do, we do also diagrams as code. And we use both Mermaid and Plan2ML because I prefer Mermaid because there are more diagram types, but only Plan2ML has use case diagrams. And that's why we use use cases with Plan2ML and more or less the rest with Mermaid. I mean, these are both also very good because if you have them in GitHub, for example, or we use Bitbucket, for example, there are plugins that can directly render the diagrams if you look at the website with the code.
And you are using Markdown and text-based diagram tools because the text can be easily handled by and read and analyzed by an AI model, or is there any other reason?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so there are two reasons for that. The first reason is what you already mentioned. So if you want to deal with AI, text-based input is usually the best. But we also want to have that under version control. So we want to see what changed in the requirement documentation. And also maybe not the requirements catalog, but when we go down to the use cases, then they are bound to the current code version. So maybe the product owner is already working on new features and analyzing these features, so the use cases will live directly on another Git branch for the new feature, for example. Plus, if you have it under version control, you can tell AI, hey, please implement the changes. And then AI can use git diff, for example, and see what exactly changed in the document and then do the changes. That's also the reason for text documents and for having everything under version control. And then based on this requirements catalog, we have kind of a parallel tasks that are running. So we can generate system use cases, as I already said. We can generate stubs for system use cases based on the requirements, and also kind of an entity model. Why an entity model? Because as you may know, I'm a very data-centric person. That's not just me, that's more or less the applications that I'm building, because I'm working a lot on business applications, and they are usually very data-centric. So we have a lot of data to manage. And also the entity model is something that the users understand, because these are usually diagrams. Very often we just have the entity names in the diagram, so we don't add the details. The details of the entity model will be also text-based in a markdown, where we can add like the attributes, the relationships will be in the diagram, but we can add the business rules, for example, validation things, so if it's an email address and stuff like that. And this also can go then later on into the code. And so the task of the product owner in that case, or in our case, is usually to review the system use cases that have been generated, to adapt it. Maybe he goes back to the AI and say, hey, that's completely wrong. We need to do that in another way. But also very well with AI is you can use AI to do the review. So, but also works very well. You can use different models. So you don't have to use Claude Code or JetBrains Juni for everything, for example. By the way, with JetBrains Juni, you can choose from GPT-5 and also the Anthropic Claude models. So you have both. If you use Claude Code, obviously you just have the Anthropic models, but you can also go to Gemini or other LLMs and to verify the IDs or the way the use cases work. What I'm currently working on, by the way, is creating templates for the system use cases, because we didn't do that, because we didn't know how exactly it would be the best way to do that, right, when I started. And but AI learns from code or from artifacts you have. So if you have already a use case in your system or in your version control in your project, then chances are high that AI will generate more or less the same system use case, the second one, and it looks at the first one to see, for example, how the header looks like, or the main flow and alternative flows, how they are kind of designed, right? But it would be very beneficial to have templates, because you also can have templates, for example, with Claude Code that you then can directly use. Again, why I use system use cases? Because I really like the structure of the use cases, because they follow a flow. So you have the main flow and the alternative flows. And if you look at the application, you usually have a flow, right? So if you have to enter data, you go to a certain page of your application, then you have to click on create button or something like that. And you can also add like diagrams to it. You can add activity diagrams. If it's a complex flow, you can add UI mockups, because today we have this MCP, Model Context Protocol servers. And if you look at the tools, for example, the UI designers very often use Figma, and Figma has also MCP capabilities, sorry for the complicated word, and you can directly use that. So you can get in the diagrams the mockups from Figma into your AI agent, and it can use that then to generate the UI, for example.
And you generate the mockups using AI, or do you create them yourself?
Both. So
Both, yeah.
both. I very often use AI to give me some ideas, because usually I use a certain UI framework. It's called Vadin, and this has a base theme. So they have like 20 or 30 components that are already there, and they have a theming where I can change the theme. And based on that, I can use AI to say, okay, I want to have the application look like this or like that. And then it can change the theming, and then it looks like that. For a customer, we have a design system. So this means we have UI components, we have styling, everything is there. And that's also Vadin. So we have kind of a library that we add as a dependency in our Maven build, and then the theming is already made there. So we just have to design the UI in terms of which input field is on which place in the UI, for example. Where are the buttons is clear because it's either left or right based on the design system, and we don't have to care about that. But that's because most of the business applications have very repetitive tasks, so all the UIs look more or less the same. But if it comes to public-facing applications where you usually have dashboards or something, or also diagrams, AI is very helpful because it can generate very nice looking card layouts, for example, or even you can use it to generate certain diagrams, whatever you like to. So this really depends on how deep you have to define how the UI will look like. Otherwise, usually it's often enough to say in the use case we want to enter data, and the data should be in that order, for example, or the fields for the input should be in that order. Because if it's a regular text field, or is it a number field, or a select or combo box, can be derived from the entity model. So if it's a relationship to another, then it's usually a combo box. If it's a number, then it's a number field. In other case, it could be a text field, or if it's a big text, it will be a text area. So that's easy to guess also for the AI what it could be. What we also do is we generate software architecture document input. So we don't generate software architecture documentation. We use Arc42 for that mostly, also with Markdown. But we use that as an input. So we can derive from the requirements catalog. Maybe there are information about qualities, so the non-functional requirements like response times or data volume, something like that, and this could be an input for the software architecture document. And And on the other hand, we have the acceptance test that usually the test engineers are doing. They can derive which acceptance tests we will need for to cover all the requirements. So the requirements catalog more or less serves as the backlog, so to say, to track if we have done everything. So that's from the green thing is more or less all the documentation, or it's kind of in the analysis and design phase what you're doing. And the result will be this entity model, as I already mentioned, and the system use cases that we want to implement. Now my process stops.
Let me quickly interrupt you. I think one important thing that you didn't mention explicitly here is all the final steps here in the green part of the diagram all have a person icon. So I guess it's never the case that we just throw something into some AI tool or model and then we get a result and we are happy. It's always that it's more or less just a tool support for us, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's not about vibe coding. I think that's the term people are using. And it's not vibe coding. It's really a agentic driven development, something like that, right? So I use AI as a tool or as a teammate, maybe not as a teammate like we would work together, it's more like someone that I can ask questions that generate something, either documentation or code or something like that. but I always do a review. I can also use AI to review, by the way, because Juni or Cloud Code or Copilot runs on GitHub, for example, and I can use that to review pull requests. So I don't need to review, but then I need to review the result of the pull request. So, but in my case, I have a look at everything. So also with my customer, the product owner is responsible for the entity model and for the system use case. So he reviews every step in the use case, and he reviews every entity in the entity model to check if everything is there. So that's very important. Yeah.
So it's about delegating the grunt work, but not the responsibility. We as a human are still responsible for making sure that the AI and we together did the right thing, and then didn't forget anything.
Yeah, that's very important, because otherwise it will. I tried that in the beginning, by the way. I tried to do vibe coding, and you get relatively far, by the way. So if you have like a simple web application, then you can generate a lot, right? And you also can use tools that will check security. Claude has like a security advisor integrated. So you have a task and can do a security review, or you can use from companies that are specialized in security reviews. And they also use AI to do security reviews. And then maybe you will find out something. But probably at a certain point, where you have more complicated stuff or more complex use cases, for example, then you may get lost with vibe coding. And that's like the 80-20 Pareto principle, right? So you get relatively far, but the remaining 20% may be the most effort to do finally. So I really see that as a help. And if you're already there, I'm really think that I'm faster doing or working in that process. I can't really tell how much faster I am because, as you know, software development is not about coding, right?
Yeah.
Software development is about thinking. Even in my volunteer management software that I'm currently working on, it's my own project. I'm the product owner, the architect, the engineer, I'm everything in that project. But at a certain point, I think, oh, no, what did I do? So that will never work. I have to go back one step and maybe think about it more, or my model was wrong and stuff like that. And there I will be much faster because changing something like the entity model is wrong. We need an additional table between some different other entities. That will be very fast in doing with AI because that really works much faster because that's kind of a boilerplate work that you do. So that's not really hard work to do.
Yeah.
But really the green part, in my opinion, is the most important part, right? So we have kind of a shift. So the shift is going back, as I said, 30, 25 years and think about how we do specification, how we can tell other developers, or in that case, AI, how to create the application that we want. And also, everything green here is not disposable. So what I often see in the past, we have like Jira tickets and Confluence, and we put there a lot of stuff in, a lot of documentation. But finally, the code is no longer the same as the documentation. So you can just throw away every documentation that you have because it's no more accurate and doesn't reflect the software you have built. Here, the point is the green thing should always stay up to date. So that's the important thing. And you always start with that. So if you have changes at new features, for example, you go to the use cases and the entity model and you adapt or change that before you go into the code. That's very important. Cool. So let's assume we have everything we need. And then we go into the orange part. So I start to generate the code, generate tests. Which tests are generated depends a bit on the type of your application. So as I mentioned, I have a lot of data-centric applications, so I don't have a lot of unit tests. Because the unit tests are for business logic, which I try to implement in a functional way that I can use that without any mocks, without any database. But that these are maybe, I don't know, 5% of all the tests. It's very, very small. So we don't have this test pyramid that we had in earlier days. We have more the testing trophy. I don't know if you know that model, that you have relatively few unit tests and then a lot of integration tests. And I have a lot of integration tests because what we can do with Vaadin, and I think that's unique to Vaadin because the UI runs server side and it just reflects the changes on the client side. We can do UI mockup tests, or mockup UI mock tests. It's also called browserless tests. So, like you may know from Spring Boot, we have the mock MVC tests and we have the Vaadin mock tests. So that means we test without a browser, and this makes the tests very, very fast, like regular integration tests. I use test containers usually to do the tests. But because no browser is involved, the tests run very fast. So I have currently I have over 1,000 tests and they run in like 30 seconds and execute thousands of SQL statements behind the scene.
Nice.
But they are very fast because no browser is involved. I also have end-to-end tests, but that's more on the red side or the acceptance tests that we have here. I use Playwright to do the tests there, but they run much slower. So they are really done for acceptance testing and not for doing regular development. But coming to the code and the tests, what I all the time do, I do the scaffolding myself. So I don't let AI generate a Spring Boot application. I never do that because you will probably get outdated versions or things that you don't like. So I really start, in case of Spring Boot, I start with start.spring.io and generate the stub. And then I continue because I want to maybe fix how test containers is used, for example, or add additional dependencies. And also for testing, because I use Caribou testing, that's a testing framework for this browserless testing with Vaadin. And I create a base test class that then AI must use if they create the tests, because there are some convenience methods, for example, logging into the application or other convenience stuff.
So do you set up general guidelines that you provide to your AI tools, or how do you do that?
A lot. So maybe I can show you one of the projects if you're already talking about that. So that's my project. It's called Voluntarix. It will be available later this year. Hopefully, I can work on it. And if we have here, I use Cloud Code. And Cloud Code has guidelines, and the guidelines file is simply called Cloud MD, so it's also a markdown file. And there we have some technology stack. So you can initialize that based on your POM XML and your current structure, for example. But then you see certain commands, for example, that it can use. Because I'm using test containers, I use test run here to run the application. It's Vaadin, so I need the production profile to do the bundling. And then we have different other of this stuff. I have some code styles. So, for example, I use type inference with var in Java all over. And then I use the Spring Java formatter to format the code because I like that. It's very opinionated. A lot of people don't like it. For me, it's perfectly fine. I'm used to it. And then we have some architecture information because the application will be multi-tenant capable, so we can have multiple organizations. And then I have domain model hierarchy. So I have volunteers for sure, users, then I have events, areas, tasks, and shifts. And finally, shift assignment for the volunteers. And that's information he knows or it knows from my project. Then we have package structures, things, and important database tables, for example, Maven information, what we should use, how adding a feature should work, testing strategies. I use SRJ. I never use Mockito or any other mocking framework. That's also here. But that's a very fun guideline because that's very, very hard. there must be so many developers out there using mocks and using extensive mocks in tests that Claude Code always wants to create mocks. And I say, no, don't do that, because I have test data also provided with Flyway, and I don't need mocks because I want to test the database, not the mock.
I love that. I've seen so many projects that mock everything and then have dozens of different test configurations with different mocks, and it gets incredibly complex, and no one can tell me what a test actually tests if I run that. So what does it do for the user?
Yeah,
Most of the times, not a lot.
Yeah. It tests the mock mostly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then I have some integration information that I use Caribou testing on Playwright. There's another project, it's called Moppo. It's a Playwright helper for the Vaadin components that is created by one of the Vaadin team. And then I have information about authorization. I have a two-level role concept, one for the overall application and one then based on the tenant, for example. And there are some information how this should work with the rows. I use date times in UTC, for example. Then we have styling information. We have information that is generated, by the way. So as you can see, there are some to-dos that are still there. I also put that in Claude Markdown in the guidelines that Claude always know about that, because that's kind of the system prompt. So that will be feeded into the context every time I use Claude Code. And what do we have here? Yeah, information about Playwright again, because I have a common base class for testing, and also information how you can run that. And also for Caribou testing, there is a base class to do that. And yeah, the rest is more or less repetitive. I once have to clean up the guidelines probably, because they're growing over time for sure.
Yeah, but that reminds me of documents that you quite often have in bigger projects for human developers in the past, that just make sure that there's an agreed set of rules on how we develop the project. Right? So instead of just telling that someone verbally who joins the team, some teams write that down, which I personally prefer. And with Claude Code or any other similar AI-based tool, we will then see that more often, I hope.
Yeah, it's like the contributions markdown that a lot of open source projects have. And this is very important. But this is kind of a problem, because I use Claude Code because I get used to that tool. I know how it behaves, or I think at least I know how it behaves. And that's very important, because there are so many tools out there, very different tools, but they are not all the same. And it's like with your favorite IDE. So if you use Eclipse or IntelliJ or NetBeans, in fact, it doesn't really matter, but you have to know how it works. Otherwise, you will not be fast using the IDE. And that's the same with agentic AI tools like Claude or Windsurf or Cursor or whatever tool you could want to use. But the problem here is that each of these tools has also this system context or guidelines file, but it has not the same name. So if you want to use Juni, which I do sometimes, I have to create a guidelines file. And that's the same. So I could reference from that file the other file if I would do it correctly. But people are already talking about we should create a standard how this guidelines file should be named, and then every tool could use the same instead of copying the content from one file to another.
Yeah. If you provide such a file to a human, they would probably just comply to, 80% of the routes. What about Claude Code? Does it follow all the routes, or do we have these typical AI issues that they are supposed to follow 100%, but they only do, 80, but these 80% might change each and every one?
Eventually, it will use the guidelines. But if you have a session with Claude Code and you look what it prints out in the console, because Cloud Code is CLI based. So I really like that. It's not integrated in the IDE. It's just a terminal tool. And then you can see that sometimes it tries to do something that is not allowed. But then it realizes, oh, I'm not allowed to do that, and it changes it. For example, what I had to do is I had to exclude Mockito. Here somewhere, Mockito is excluded. As you can see here, Spring Boot started test. I excluded Mockito core and Mockito JUnit. Jupyter dependencies that it is not possible to use it because it constantly tries to create mocks. So, but it realizes, oh, this doesn't work, so let's do a different approach. Yeah, that's true. So AI is sometimes trying to do things that it shouldn't do, even if it's in the guidelines. Yeah, that's true. Now, maybe if we are already here, as I said, the package structure and everything is pre-generated. So the POM file here, somewhere in the guidelines, we will also find a section where it's marked never touch the POM XML. So AI is not allowed to change that. Never, never. Because I want to have that under my own control. And also the generation of, like, for example, the test application here, test contents configuration, that's something I don't want to have that AI is doing that, because for that I use start Spring.io, then I always have the latest idea of how the Spring Framework team or the Spring Boot team is thinking about doing that. And then I have this project, this docs folder, and here I have kind of the vision of that. And in the requirements documentation, I have this domain model, and I have a diagram. Maybe we can see that like this. So this is an ERD diagram that is generated by Juni based on the requirements. But here we only have the most important, I think it's only the foreign key and primary keys and certain fields like a status or important date. So that's not complete. I have the domain model in textual description like this. And here we also have like examples, for example, that's very important, or the structure at all. For example, we have an organization, event, an area, task, and shift. So this is an example from my club, sports club, for example, that it can use and remembers how this should work. And then I create use cases, and the use cases are in a kind of an overview. So these are, let's say, epics. These are not epics. It's more a grouping of certain areas of the application. And then we see all the actors in the system, for example. And then based on the overall, I create here some use case diagrams. The green ones are completed. So I also use AI to track the progress. So I often ask AI, hey, is the use case UC event 004 completed? And then it can check the code and find out if the flow in the use case diagram is also reflected in the code, for example. I use that as an entry point. So when we go here to the generation of the code and the tests, the use case is always the starting point. So I tell the first thing that I did, by the way, I created the entity model to a certain point where I'm convinced that this model would work. And then I let AI generate flyway scripts. And because I'm using Chook will then generate, based on the database, the data access classes or the meta model classes that I can use with the Chook DSL. By the way, AI is very good in SQL. It's also very good in Chook. So this works pretty well. And because the Chook documentation is only HTML and not Markdown in the GitHub, and Context 7, I don't know if you know Context 7. It's a tool, maybe I can show that to the audience, where you can register your docs. So initially I don't know based on what they generated the documentation. But when we look, for example, at let's take Caribou, for example. Where do we have it? I find it. Caribou. Where did it go? Strange. Let's take another example. Let's take Vadin. Here we have. So it used, it uses GitHub, or initially it used GitHub to import data and to create documentation, or to use the code snippets here as Markdown. And then Context 7 has an MCP server that serves this documentation. So I can configure MCP service with Claude or with any other AI tool, and then it can use Context 7 to find documentation about Vadin. But this is not good enough, so Markus Selberg from the Vadin team created its own Vadin MCP server that serves Vadin documentation, and that's very good because it works very well. By the way, my favorite MCP server is from Playwright, from the Microsoft end-to-end testing tool, because AI can use Playwright to start the application, or the browser with the application, to take screenshots, to look at the DOM, and then to change the application, or to compare screenshots, for example, or find design problems, or even use that to generate Playwright tests from the application that it can introspect in the browser. That's brilliant. And what I did, I created a Juke MCP server, but this is more or less no more necessary, because Context 7 added the possibility not only to add GitHub repositories, you can directly add websites now. So my MCP server was a nice exercise with Spring AI, but it's superfluous, and we don't need that anymore. I use it still because, it's mine, but it wouldn't be necessary. So we should also find here Juke. And Juke should now be here with, as you can see here, that's the Juke from the Git repo, but Juke has not much documentation there, but the rest is the latest manual. And that's a bit an issue, because it just has the latest. So if you're on an older Juke version, maybe some features might not work, but that's probably not a high percentage. But if you have a new library, then maybe this could be a problem.
Do you know if Context 7 is planning to change that so that you have different versions of it? I haven't heard anything about it, but I might be wrong.
Me neither. I even didn't knew about the website that you can add. Someone pointed out
yeah, that was
LinkedIn.
New to me as well.
Yeah, because here in the ad, you can repository where there's also text file, and directly from the website. Yeah. But I don't know if they will support versions or not. Markus Selberg with the Vadin documentation can or supports versions. So it asks for versions. It also have kind of a primer. That's a very nice thing about the Vadin MCP server, because the AI agent will then first read the primer, how it should use the MCP server and what it has to provide to get the best results, for example.
Yes.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And for everyone who's not familiar with MCP servers, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol, and it's basically a standard defining a client and a server backend that you can use to make external tools available to an AI model. So the AI model just needs an MCP client based on a standard, and they can then communicate with an external server, which is nice because it allows us to provide external services like this Context 7 somewhere on the internet, and everyone can easily integrate it. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are the MCP servers that I have configured globally. So Context 7 is there. Then there is a Javadoc MCP server. So it's created by, I forgot his name, someone from Amazon, also a Java champion, created Javadoc server. And then there's Truk, that's mine. And there's a Playwright. This is highly recommended if you do web application development. That's very important. Then I use SonarQube because I want also check the code style, for example, or find some probable bugs, for example. I want to measure test coverage also, so I use SonarQube. And what I can do is I can tell Claude, please use the SonarQube MCP server and fix the issues in a certain class, for example. And then it will do that. By the way, SonarQube can do that as well in the meanwhile. And then there's the Vadin. And if we go there, we can see the tools. So tools is kind of API endpoints, kind of. And here we can see that we can get a primer or search Vadin docs, get the full document, or get the current Vadin version. And here we have this information and the description. Don't know if I can. No, that's everything that I see. And that's pretty handy. And if you look at the Playwright server, you can see there are a lot of tools. So there you can handle dialog, evaluate JavaScript, upload files, fill forms, go back, navigate to URL, page snapshot, take a screenshot, do a click, mouse drag. So you can really remote control the browser from the AI agent directly. So that's very, very, very helpful. Yeah, exactly. And so when we are here, I always use the reference to the use case. So I say, please implement use case event 004 or test use case event 004, do Caribou tests first, and the end-to-end tests, I'm not very happy. So Caribou testing, unit testing, integration testing works very well with Claude. But it's not so nice is using or creating Playwright tests. It gave me sometimes a bit of a headache in the beginning because I thought it should work like with Caribou. Because with Caribou, I can say generate a test. And then it does a white box test. So it goes to the view and analyzes what's there and what it could do and checks the use case and does the main flow and the alternative flows. Works very well. But with end-to-end test, I very often have timeouts because it can't find the element on the page. And I had other glitches because Vadin has web components and not regular HTML components. And figuring out that, you need Mopo. But I was asking about that on LinkedIn this weekend, I think, and someone said, yeah, he had the same issue. What he did, he created a first test by hand, so directly writing down Playwright. He also used test IDs. I don't like that, but he did that. And from that point, he always referenced that test case, that one test case, and said, please do the end-to-end tests always like that. And then, because there was a template, probably the results were much better than in the beginning.
So like a junior developer, the AI tool sometimes just needs an example or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And you said you generate the code and the tests based on a use case. Each use case is described in these Markdown files there, right?
Yeah. For example,
there's a detailed description that tells the tool everything it needs.
Yeah. So here we have the header and also the status. That means here you can see that was already generated more than a month ago. And I also keep track. So I have also this file here, that's implementation tracking. And here I can see the status to keep track on what I'm currently doing. And here, if you look at the create event, we have the precondition. So we have a certain role, for example, and other information about that. And then I have this main success scenario in the use case. And here you can see that the order of the required fields is in the text. So it will generate the form exactly with these fields, the information about required and how large this is. By the way, that's still the ugly Hibernate default. I don't know why I use that, but anyway, this is directly derived from the domain model. So this is the information there. And then it has the manager fills in the required information, submits the form, validates, creates the event, blah, 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 and so on. And then we have alternative flows where, for example, there's canceling or validation fails or database errors or start date in the past. That's something that's even not possible, so it cannot be tested because the date picker do not allow that. And then we have the success post condition, what exactly should happen. And there are also business rules, and these are derived from the requirements document and also from the domain model. And this is enough to generate the code and also the tests. And there's also a use case test coverage matrix. And there we have some tests. And these are the end-to-end tests now. And here you can see which test method is testing which version of that. Funny thing, I didn't delete that because usually I would delete that because I don't have a test for database error. Because I have a global exception handler, and if there is some networking issues or something like that, I don't care about that. It will simply generate a generic message. And here we have also the other testing, stuff like that. And this is not complete because I'm not done yet with testing.
And you created this document together with AI.
Yeah. So as you can see here in the process, the artifacts are first generated, tests, code, also other documents that are not here in the process. So I didn't add the tracking documents that I use. And these are always reviewed. So that's very important. And this is the main task for me in the end. So generating is very fast. Also code works very fast. Testing takes a bit more time because it tests more than I would do. That's because I'm a very lazy person. I'm also a lazy tester. So I try to find out which tests are really needed to prove that my application really works. But AI, because I say, hey, test the use case, will test all the flows that it finds. It will also test all the rules that are there. But some of the rules you don't need to test because they are kind of baked in the application. For example, you have a number field. You cannot enter a letter in a number field, for example. But that's fine to me because the test coverage is pretty decent with that.
Yeah, and if you set up your tests the right way, it doesn't take a lot of time to run those tests, right? So I think that's one of the advantages we will definitely get with using more AI tools. I mean, and two things Diddy showing here to me. First of all, the huge amount of work you put into this green phase, which creates lots of documentation, which, to be honest, we are quite often missing right now and in the past, where a developer just got a task and the description was a slightly more detailed form of do something. And after that, people started complaining that the developer didn't create what was requested, which usually was because it wasn't described. That gets way more detailed in your process, and I love that. And right, if we do get better test coverage, I think that's always a good thing. Even if a few tests might not be that necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, what's also important or interesting, not important, interesting, is maybe you have a certain use case, but because it depends a bit on the order, how you generate the code for the use cases, it might be that in a use case, you rely on something else that's not yet implemented. For example, I can't send emails at the moment. So my email service is just prints out in the log that I can see what would be sent. because I'm not sure which email provider I want to use. If I want to use SMTP or some SendGrid or something else, I'm not sure, so I didn't do that. So I have an interface that's a mail service, and this will be handled there. And because it knows that this is not yet implemented, it adds to do by its own. So if I look here at my to-dos, I should see where do I have the to-dos. Here we have to-dos. I have 70 to-dos somewhere. That's the wrong. And here we see that they're missing, for example, send notification if a coordinator is assigned to a certain area. And that's very cool. So that's also why I disabled the rule in SonarQube that it should check for to-dos. Because in my workflow, to-dos are nothing bad. To-dos are a good thing because it's a reminder that something is missing. It's not, these are always reminders, but you know the to-dos that are there for 10 years and no one is taking care of it.
Yeah.
Because now if I'm implementing the email service or the email service will be done, I can tell, please fix all to-dos related to sending emails, for example. And then AI will do that. And will also update the use case that finally checks, okay, sending emails is also done. And that's the beauty of my use case. Maybe important thing is I'm not alone with the ID. There are many, many other IDs how to do that. One is very new. It's I don't want to promote this tool here, but I just want to show it to you because there is a video you can watch somewhere. And they have the same ID, but just a little different. So Kiro is a Visual Studio Code integration, as you can see, and it has that flow. So create requirements, create design, and then they have tasks. Something that I don't have in my process, there are no tasks. So if you would go from user stories, you would usually create tasks, right? And the task will be in the sprint planning and stuff like that. I don't do that because I want to implement the whole use case. I don't want to break that down into tasks. So if I say implement the use case, it has to check if the database tables are there, if Juk is generated, it must have a look if all the components that may be required there are there, or create new components or ask for components. So I really stop at the use case. I don't go deeper because there are always like Tesla or other IDs how to do that, and they always have requirements, user stories, tasks. I don't need tasks, I have use cases. And that's the beauty of, in my opinion, the beauty of my workflow, because AI can handle use cases. You don't have to go deeper. And I also don't, something that we didn't discuss yet is AI is not deterministic. But I don't care, right? Because what I have is I create the code initially, then I create tests, verify test and code, eventually create acceptance testing. So based on the user side, does the UI look correct? So I don't test everything, because I test everything with Caribou. So I have this mock testing, but with the acceptance testing is more, are the buttons at the right place? Does it look good? Stuff like that. Does it work in the browser finally? For sure. But if I have these tests in place, I can change the use case. And when it generates, or when I tell him to update the code, depending on what I change, the test must fail, right? If they don't fail, then I did probably something wrong, or the tests are useless, depending. So we have mutation testing that we could try or check if the tests would be appropriate. But in my process, I don't care if the code that is generated is the same as before. That sounds a bit strange, right? But AI is not a compiler, AI is a generator, and it generates. So if I generate now something and in 5 minutes, I deal with 2 different developers. And 2 different developers wouldn't create the exact same code. But as long as the tests work, my code is fine, right? So I do not care.
Yeah, on one side I get it. On the other, that is one of the things I'm struggling with when using AI tools. I mean, I get it. As long as my tests are strict enough and test everything that's important, it doesn't really matter how something is done as long as it passes all the tests.
Yep.
Sure. But here, in your process, you have a review for task for code and a review for tests. Doesn't it create a lot of review effort if a bigger part of the code base changes, even if it passes the tests?
I have that. I don't know where this comes from, but people are telling me, how do you deal with AI generating or changing random code in your code base? That's not my observation.
It doesn't change random code. I mean, it does something based on a use case description.
Yep.
And sure, sometimes use cases overlap in the code, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there are not any random changes. And even if there were, you would see them in Git. I mean, before committing them, you would see all the changes that were performed. And could still decide, okay, that was lots of nonsense. Let's try it again.
Yeah, that I often do that. You know, sometimes I'm not happy with the first shot, so I revert everything. So for me, it's very important. I also use, you need version control.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're lost, because Claude Code has no undo. So it generates something, and if you're not happy, I often stop, because I see from the output that goes in the wrong direction. I stop it. Either I can tell to change to do it otherwise, or I just revert changes and restart. So that's something I very often do. That takes time for sure. So these are the areas where you probably don't save a lot of time in compared if you would do it by hand. But for me, it's more about the use cases and the user documentation, or not the user documentation, the specification that I want to have up to date. So that's very, very important for me. So the code is not at the same level. But I would say, if I look at the pull requests, because I can directly create pull requests with Claude Code if I want to. I'm alone, right? I can review it directly in the IDE. I don't need a pull request, by the way. But if I would do that, I have pull requests from the same quality as I usually have in customer projects, because some of the developers also change a lot of things or unrelated things, or the pull requests are way too big. So it really depends on how you work. And that's the same if you do it by your own, or another developer does it, or AI does it. What I tried also is creating or using pull requests on GitHub. Maybe I can show you one. These are dependables, but here we have closed ones. Let me check if I find one of these. So Claude has also integration for GitHub, like Copilot does, like Juni does, and you can assign, or you can create GitHub actions that runs Claude here. And here I created a pull request for the cancel event use case, for example. And that's what it finally created. So it really creates a summary, if it's good or not, and then it tells what's okay and what's not. And then we know that's the initial pull request for sure. And then the Claude bot is doing the review, and it tells you what looks good, what should have improvements, potential bugs. It finds test coverage. It finds, and it also has a look at. Do we see that somewhere? It has also a look at SonarQube if there are bugs related to the new changes. Let me see if I can. It's course somewhere. Now the point is, this is a huge pull request description, right? Or a huge review description that you have to review. So in that case, the review that was generated by the bot was more than the code that has changed. so kind of, it's kind of yeah. I browse it sometimes because it often has interesting approaches that I can do. And here even I told it to fix it, so Claude can fix things. And what do we have? Finally, addressed, fixed, and then probably I merged it.
Mhm.
Yeah, finally. So you can also deal with that. Some tools use GitHub to parallelize the work.
Mhm.
We could spin up multiple Claudes. Also, by the way, locally I use a Git work tree for that. So I have different branches. I can work in parallel with multiple agents. Claude has sub-agents that you can define. So you can say, let's look at my sub-agents here. They're here somewhere. Agents. I have a Joke SQL expert, for example. And this has some information. For example, I always want to use records mapping
Mhm.
because this will also get compile errors if the projection doesn't match the constructor. And there are some information about how I want to have a joke. And if switch to that mode, if Claude thinks that the joke expert here can help, then it will delegate parts of the work to the joke expert. And this one has not all MCP tools available. So, for example, they just have the joke MCP server and can write and read data
Mhm.
files, for example. I have a Caribou testing expert, a Playwright, a UX UI design expert, and a Vadin UI expert. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. I can directly just use that and not the general purpose agent or the regular agent. And this is also quite handy. But these are things that you have to learn. Again, AI tools like Claude Code need some time to learn. And I would say I'm using that for now since Claude Code was released in February, so for half a year. And I'm still not on the same level as other people that I usually watch their videos on YouTube. So I learn every day something new. And it's very interesting. It's like if you work with a coworker, you learn every day something,
Yeah.
right? So you know finally how the people behave or what they like, what they don't like, how you should tell them what they should do, for example, or how you can help them or coach them. And that's the same with AI tools.
Yeah. Yeah, that are almost good final words, but there's one. There are two things I would like to ask you to wrap this whole session up. The first of all of those would be, if one of our viewers is now wondering what will be the skill set they need to have in the near future to work in software development where AI tools are more commonly used. What do you think will be the skill set they need? And then maybe summarize the process, your AI-driven process in a few words.
Yep. I think what the skill set that you need is you need to know how to read code and how to understand code. And people often tell me, hey, how would you do that? I mean, you get junior developers from the university, they can't do that. So they can't review that. And I always tell them, no, you're wrong. Because I started 30 years ago as a COBOL developer on IBM mainframe, and guess what? I just had to read code and fix bugs or create new features. I didn't write a single new program. So the programs back in the days were programs, so it's not comparable to Java because of classes, but whatever. I just learned coding from reading other people's code. And I need to read other code, or need to read manuals and learn programming. I mean, you need to know the tools. Anyway, if whoever creates the code, if it's AI, if it's you, if it's a coworker, if it's someone from Australia, it doesn't matter. You need to check the code and see if the code is appropriate. And you need to learn that. So that means at universities, the skill set doesn't change, in my opinion. So students need to learn programming. They need to learn SQL. They need to learn requirements engineering because they need to understand system use cases, for example. They need to learn databases, need to learn platforms, whatever. But the difference is that you may not write that much code by your own, but you need to know how to do that.
And I think that that's even more important than before, because when you're not using, so when you're writing your code yourself, then you quickly recognize that you don't understand something because you don't know what to write. And you spend most of your day on Stack Overflow or documentation or next to your coworker who has more experience with that. And with AI, you can just generate it, and then you have something. Might even pass the test that you defined, and you still don't know what it's doing. And I think that's at least the risk for AI-driven development.
Yeah, but as I said, I had the same situation 30 years ago because it was my code. I had no idea what I changed. I didn't know it. Didn't know SQL very well, so I just write and errors and had help from other people telling me if I did correct or not. Here now I can also get the conversation with AI and ask, is this okay what you did or not, or could it be improved? Maybe you learn from that, and you're faster. So the point is, what do junior developers today? They go to Stack Overflow, to Google, and find things that might not be correct, and they just copy paste it, and it works. Maybe it doesn't work, but that's the same situation, more or less, right?
Yeah, it's just faster.
Just faster, yeah.
Okay, so can you maybe summarize the entire process and the key points that our viewers should keep in mind after the session? And then I think we wrap it up.
Very good. So looking at the process again, so the blue phase is not different from today, probably. So you have to gather requirements, you have a vision, what you want to build, and finally you end up with a bunch of requirements. No matter if this is an Excel file, if this is our user stories, whatever it is, you have requirements. And based on these requirements, you can start generate a lot of things. So you can generate, for example, system use cases and entity models, just maybe do a scaffolding or entirely generate it, depending on how good the requirements are. But the important thing is the green part here on my diagram, you have to take care that the entity model is consistent, that it's correct. And you have to take care that the system use cases are always correct and are doing what you want. And the point is, these artifacts here are usually not done by a developer. So usually it is the product owner, the business analyst, the requirements engineer. I don't know. There are so many names for the same tasks or the same person. Probably this could be someone. But the point is, these documents will be understood by the end users, even by the end users, depending on the organization that you have. And once you have that in a certain quality, you can start and generate code. So in fact, the difference here is that the truth is in the system use case and in the entity model and not in the code, always. And that also means that you can generate the code, you can generate the tests, and very important, you have to review everything. You can't rely on AI because it's not deterministic, and probably it will add something that's not appropriate at all in your application. So you need to have skills or people that are able to review the code, that are able to review the tests. You also have something that we didn't talk about, for sure, continuous delivery or continuous integration, at least, that your tests run. that you get immediate feedback. I use SonarQube for quality control as well. But this overall process will give you the possibilities in 10 years to modernize your software. Because you can start and say, okay, we want to change the UI layer, for example, or we want to change the whole application to something else. And then probably AI will be even better than today. And you can use the use cases and say, okay, generate me a mobile application or generate me a React or whatever framework could be the new kid on the block in 2035 and regenerate that.
Yeah. I think that is a great summary of the entire session you presented here for a little over an hour already. And I love it. It looks like something that was already there in the past, that integrates AI now with good practices from software development. So that is what I mean by that was already there in the past. I mean, requirements, documents, and system use cases. It's not exactly a new thing. It just revises how important that is, and that it will be even more important with AI, that and understanding what code actually does. Writing code, I think, has never been our main job as software developers. Always thought of us more like a problem solver and understanding a problem and finding a way to solve it instead of writing code. And yeah, based on what you showed us, I think it might not take too long until the actual writing of code might be at least very limited. So more problem solving, less writing code. I think that's great. So yeah, Simon, thanks for being here. I've put up the slide with your credentials again. What is the best way to reach out to you if people want to get in touch about this process? Is it Blue Sky, LinkedIn, or maybe the website you just showed?
Any of that, by the way, on the website, if you scroll down to the bottom, you will find the Calendly widget where you can directly ask for a session with me for half an hour, where we can discuss various things. So, where are you in the process? Do you like to go kind of to this process? How can I support you? I can do that right away, and you can directly book here free slot for you.
Oh, that's comfortable. Nice. Okay. Well, then I would say we end it here. Simon, again, thanks for being here again and sharing your process with us. For everyone out there, give it a try. If you have not already done it, use Claude Code or any other tool, maybe Juni in IntelliJ, and start generating your code. It's something I think every software developer nowadays at least have to give a try. And if you do that, you will for sure remember Simon's process and all the things that he shared here today, because you will need it for sure. Okay, that's for today. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.